Over the last few years, the Fostex TH series has been widely popular as a fun, strongly colored audiophile proposition with their V-shaped house sound. Based on the now discontinued Denon D2000, 5000, and 7000, which used the Foster bio-cellulose or bio-dyna drivers, they come in a variety of flavors including different woods. Today, we'll be looking at two of the most popular ones, the Fostex TH-X00 in mahogany, made in China, which was released in conjunction with Mass Drop in November 2015 with an MSRP of $399, and the Fostex TH-900, made in Japan, released in February 2013 with an MSRP of $2,249. Now the regular price you can buy a brand new TH-900 for is about $1,299. Of course, both headphones can be purchased for much cheaper when you buy them used, and both the ones I have were actually purchased secondhand. Now, physically speaking, the two headphones share many design features. For example, both feature the same magnesium alloy frame, which I'm going to show you in just a second. So this frame, which feels pretty solid, is magnesium alloy. They also have the same adjustment right here, as well as the same headband adjustment, which feels pretty clicky. As a fun fact, this cup adjustment and the headband adjustment are both looser on my TH-900. I personally believe that is because it's a different production batch. This is a very early TH-900, which was made in 2013, and this one was produced later, so the pieces may be different. Also, it could be just general use. This one's older, so it was used more, so maybe that contributed to it getting looser. But by no means is it flimsy at all. However, the design has one big flaw. And that big flaw is this hinge right there at the yoke. Now, as I've said previously, this headphone was based on the Denon D series, and they used a similar mechanism here in the yoke. It was just very notorious for failing. I know someone who works at an audio store, and he told me that back when they used to sell the Denon D series, they used to get a lot of returns for it. Now, Fostex has addressed the issue by changing up the mechanism, but the principle is still the same, and there are still many failures, albeit a bit less than back in the Denon days. Now, not only that, but my X100 has a tiny creak it came with. It's on the left side. I don't know if you can hear it. It's really minimal, and the adjustment feels pretty tight on both sides. It's just something that doesn't inspire too much confidence, and I feel like it's not an ideal design choice. So that is that. Otherwise, both headphones feature the same little headband, which is pretty thin and firm, but I've had no issues with comfort, so that's pretty surprising, even though I wore them for hours and hours. They also come with the same non-detachable cable, which is terminated in a 1/4-inch plug. I think it's 3 meters long, and it's very stiff. I personally really dislike this cable, but as you may have noticed, both these headphones have a detachable cable mod. Now, the X100 came with an SMC mod, which is the screw-on plug used in the the older Hi-Fiman models, and the 900 has this 2.5mm mini plug. That one is done by Udis, which is a popular member in the headphones Discord, and this one was done by Peterek, which is a popular Headfly member. The quality of both of these mods is pristine. I mean, I see absolutely no flaws. The SMC mod is actually reversible because it requires no modification of the wood cups, as well as the MMCX mod, I think, also requires no modification of the wood cups. However, the 2.5mm mini jack is bigger, so it requires some grinding of the wood cups to get it to fit in there, but I don't think it modifies sonic performance at all. If you are looking for a detachable cable mod, I would personally go with Udis because I know that he's a very competent headphone modder, and his prices are much lower than Peter-X. Even though Peter-X is, Peter-X is also a very good headphone modifier. So that is that. Strongly recommend getting a mod done for these. Okay, so now let's move on to the differences. The most striking differences between those two headphones is in the wood cups. Now, both these headphones are really gorgeous. The X100 comes with a mahogany wood. I'll see if I can bring the camera a bit closer. But there's this really beautiful mahogany wood, and you can look at the grain. That one doesn't have the craziest grain. It's in a gloss finish, but you can have X100s with more beautiful grain than this, although I like it very much. Looks very natural. And you can also have the TH-900, which comes with a Japanese cherry birchwood in this fancier Japanese urushi lacquer, which is painstakingly long to make. There's a video that shows how it's made. It has silver foil, and this little logo is written with platinum foil. It's just much fancier. I personally think the aesthetics of the TH-900 are better, although it's mostly subjective. Some people may say that you can't even see the wood grain on the TH-900, so the X100 grain looks better. I mean, beauty is subjective, right? Anyway, that's the first difference. The other big difference in the headphones is in the internal damping. Now, the X100 only has the wood cups and the baffle and the driver inside. However, the TH-900 has some internal damping at the back of the driver inside the cups. And apparently the TH-900 Mark II also has damping, and it's damped even more aggressively than the TH-900. And apparently that accentuates some of its treble issues even further, although I haven't verified this, so don't, take this for gospel or anything. It's just something that I was told. But the damping is true that this one has damping and this one doesn't. It's just that the Mark II, I don't know if the damping is different and it changes the sound. This I'm not sure about. What else? Both of these headphones have the same diaphragm, the same 50 millimeter bio-cellulose diaphragm, although they have different magnets. The X100 has a magnet with a little over 1 Tesla of magnetic flux density, and the TH-900 has a magnet with 1.5 Teslas of magnetic flux density. So it's a more powerful magnet, and it's a cleaner driver. I'm gonna mention it in the review, but that is that. And the last difference, which is probably the most important one sonically, I mean, yes, there is a different magnet, but the TH-600 I think uses the same magnet and the same driver as the X100, and it sounds very, very close to the 900. So I think the main difference sonically is because of the ear pads. The TH-900 comes with those circular ear pads, which are made of protein, I think it's eggshell protein leather. It's pretty soft, they're very comfortable, and yeah, that's that. The TH-X00, on the other hand, has more aggressively angled ear pads. Those ones are also angled, but less so. The pads are more firm. They're also an eggshell protein. The ear opening is smaller and it's oval shaped. And in my experience, it's a lot less comfortable. Oh, by the way, it has an attenuation ring under also the pads to tune the bass, which is not on the TH-900. But yeah, in my opinion, I found the X100 less comfortable than the 900 simply because of the pads, which are more firm and smaller. But sonically speaking, the TH-900 pads are not ideal, and I'll get into that later in the review. Anyway, now it's time to get into the sound. Now, as a disclaimer, evaluation of sonic performance is mostly subjective, so I would like you all to take my opinion with a grain of salt. You may agree or disagree, but no matter what, my opinion shouldn't be taken for gospel. Ideally, you should audition both headphones before making a decision. My source is mostly Spotify set to extreme quality, with some FLAC files here and there. My DAC is the Ship Modi 2 Revision B, the one with the AK4490 chip, and my amplifier is the Schiit Asgard 2. My method of testing is through A and B after volume matching both headphones with a 1 kHz test tone at 80 decibels using a small SPL meter. So, both these headphones, the Fostex bio-cellulose ones, are known for their bass, and both these headphones have an accentuated bass, and they have excellent bass. I'll start by evaluating the bass of the TH-X00. Now, the bass on the X00 is extremely authoritative. Its sub-bass is noticeably lifted when compared to the mid-bass and the upper bass. It's a less even bass than on the 900, but it's more fun in my opinion because you get that extra rumble in the sub-bass. The extension is top-notch. I honestly can't hear any roll-off in, even in, deep electronic music or rap. I just hear no roll-off. It slams really well. It's really punchy. The texture is nice and solid, although it can sound a bit bloomy or liquid when compared to the 900, which has even tighter, faster, and more focused bass. Speaking of, the 900, as I said, it has a more even bass, and that evenness may make it sound a bit less authoritative, but still, it really packs a punch. The sub-bass and mid-bass are at relatively similar levels, while the upper bass is slightly reduced in comparison. For some, this may be more realistic or less fun. For example, if you listen to bass guitar on the 900, it's going to sound more coherent, but the added rumble on lower registers may be more pleasing for some, or for others it may be just wrong when you listen to the X00. So yeah, that one has a more even bass, and that's that. The extension is superb on the 900, similarly to the X00. The sub-bass lift on the X00 may make it sound like the extension's better, but honestly roll-off is inaudible on both, so I'd say the extension is basically the same. In terms of punch, I'd say the 900 is even punchier than the X00 because the attack in the bass is more visceral in the mid and upper bass, which make up most of the low end in music. And finally, in terms of texture, it's just phenomenal. Honestly, the texture on the TH-900 is incredible. It's better than the X00 for sure. It's a harder bass. It's a more solid bass. It's noticeably cleaner and more detailed. Also, the layering in the bass is better. It's noticeably better on the 900. And I don't like making blanket statements, but honestly, the TH-900 has the best bass I've ever heard out of any headphone, period. So that's that. So now let's talk about mid-range. I'll start with the X00, which overall, in terms of mid-range, has a pretty musical mid-range. But I'll start with the transition. The transition from the bass to the mid-range is very smooth, but it's not the cleanest, as some of the bass slightly bleeds into the mid-range, but it's very minimal. You really have to pay attention for it. The tonality of it is pretty thick. The mid-range is a little recessed and thick. The lower mids are emphasized compared to the upper mid-range, so it follows a downward slope towards the upper mid-range. It's very smooth and musical in terms of tonality. As I said, the upper mids sound slightly dipped when compared to the lower mid-range, but they're not hollow at all. So don't worry about having a hole like you get on the faux cavalier, for example. In terms of timbre, some upper registers with instruments like the flute may lack a bit of energy when compared to the lower ones. Also, other instruments sound a bit meatier and thicker than they should. For example, if you listen to acoustic guitar, some of the lowest registers can sound a bit artificially boosted. And that was especially noticeable when I listened to Don Ross, because he's a very good guitar player, and he goes often from the lowest registers up to the very highest ones. And you get those slightly recessed upper mids, and you get those boosted lower mids in comparison, and it feels like the lowest registers are just way stronger than the upper mids. But it's not a massive problem, it's just a little quirk about the timbre on this headphone. But yeah, it's not the most realistic timbre. It's noticeably warm and smoothed out, but considering the tuning that these headphones are going for, I think it's perfectly acceptable, and it's honestly really enjoyable to just get this headphone that smooths things out and doesn't try to be analytical or something. It's really nice. In terms of vocals, these have a good rendition overall, especially for a V-shaped headphone. The vocals are not too recessed or distant. I'll start with female vocals. They're presented nicely, maybe a tad warmer than neutral, but still, it's just the tonality of these headphones. The upper harmonics still have decent clarity and things don't sound too subdued. Male vocals are also very enjoyable. You get very lifelike depth, while the occasional grittiness from some vocalists comes through nicely, without sounding muted or covered up like you get in other headphones sometimes. In terms of layering, the X00 does an okay job, although it can get hazy on some tracks. Overall, I enjoy the vocal performance, but I could see others wanting a bit more energy in the upper mid-range. So yeah, that mid-range is quite well balanced. Overall, it's very sweet and musical, despite being a tad recessed. I think it's well done. I like that mid-range a lot. So, let's move on to the TH-900. And the mids on that headphone are drastically different. I'll start with the transition. I simply heard no bass bleed into the mid-range, which makes the transition from the low to the mid frequencies more competent, although it's a bit less coherent because of the big lower mid-range dip that these headphones have. The mid-range itself overall sounds more clean than the X100's mid-range, but quite clinical in terms of tonality, and I'll explain that. That's because the TH-900 has a thin mid-range. The lower mid-range is really recessed. I mean, all of the mid-range is super recessed. I mean, much more recessed than on the X100. But the lower mids especially, compared to the upper mids, they're very subdued, and then you get a small boost in the upper mids, and it really sounds off. It's lacking in terms of musicality and realism. For example, the timbre of the TH-900 is simply wrong. The meat of the instruments is simply lacking, and there's an artificial boost in the upper harmonics. Things overall sound hollow and fake. It's definitely a big departure from the X100, which has a lush and musical mid-range. On the 900, that warmth is lost, and even acoustic tracks gain a bit of a tinny character. It's definitely not something I like, and it really doesn't help that the overall mid-range is even more recessed than on the X100. In terms of vocals, rendition is, similarly to the timbre, it's disappointing, especially since that is Fostex's top of the line. The vocals are noticeably more recessed on the 900. Female vocals sound overly thin, and that is something you notice, especially with higher pitched vocalists like Petra Magoni. Male vocals are slightly better presented than female vocals with the TH-900, but they're still not up to snuff and not done well in my opinion. They lack body and warmth. For example, when I was listening to Leonard Cohen, may he rest in peace by the way, the deep character of his voice stood out much more on the X100, whereas on the 900 it felt a bit muted in comparison. Also, the grittiness is sometimes overly exaggerated with some male vocalists. And, sometimes the vocals, because of that, can sound a bit harsher than they should be. However, layering and separation of the vocals is easily superior on the 900 than on the X100, which is pretty much the only aspect of the vocals I prefer on this headphone. So yeah, in terms of balance, I don't want to sound too critical, but in my opinion the mid-range tuning is blatantly flawed on the TH-900. There's lots of recession, even compared to the already V-shaped X100, and there are glaring problems within the mid-range itself. It's overly thin and analytical, especially when compared to the smooth and warm X100. I really find the mid-range hard to like, even for a flavor can, which is supposed to be colored. It's just a weird mid-range. Now, moving on to the treble. I'll start with the X100, which so far, I mean, you can see where this review is going, but I'll start with the X100. The treble is emphasized, although it's not exaggerated. I wouldn't call the TH-X00 bright, as its top end is crisp, but not overbearing. It doesn't stand out as particularly flat, like for example HT600 treble, which is really flat, but it's relatively even overall. There are no annoying peaks I can easily distinguish through my music listening. But as with any headphone that emphasizes treble, you can get hearing fatigue after extended listening at loudish volumes. Some areas of the treble are a bit subdued in comparison to the rest, but I didn't hear any extreme dips, which is a good thing. So yeah, in terms of quality, the top end is quite clean, but it doesn't particularly stand out by its cleanliness. However, it's still excellent for a semi-closed headphone. In terms of air, while the treble of the X100 is nicely balanced, I did find it very slightly lacking in terms of air. This can make the headphone sound a bit closed in, but it's not a glaring issue, and overall it's quite nice. In terms of sparkle, the X100 has a nice upper treble response, but again, it's slightly subdued in comparison to the low and mid treble. So sometimes the shimmer and decay cymbals can be a little underwhelming. I know that by saying that the headphone is slightly lacking in terms of air and sparkle, it seems dark. However, it's not the case, as those are the only two areas of the treble where I saw a slightly reduced response in comparison to the rest of the treble, and not the rest of, the whole frequency response. In terms of detail retrieval and poor recordings, the X100, with its exciting sound signature, is a very detailed headphone that can pick up subtle nuances and make them stand out. However, it's not resolving like, say, an HD800. However, it is not too unforgiving with poor recordings, and it can make for an enjoyable listening experience more than an analytical one. So, even bad recordings on this sound pretty decent. So now we'll move on to the TH-900 treble. And it's going to sound like I'm being unfair towards this headphone, because so far I totally dislike the mids. But the treble is also very problematic on the TH-900. It's not simply emphasized like on the X100, it's completely exaggerated. The TH-900 is a very bright headphone, and it can definitely be too much for many listeners. The treble is not as even as on the X100. There's a massive boost in the low treble, and it takes a lot of attention. Sibilance is easily detectable. The mid treble is slightly dipped in comparison to the low and upper treble, but it's still very, very elevated compared to the rest of the frequency response. The top end is very crisp, however, but it's super unforgiving. Many headphones will give you hearing fatigue after extended listening. For example, the HD800, where you listen for loudish volumes and it takes a bit less time for your ears to get tired compared to other headphones. No, this is one of the few headphones where the treble on some songs sounded instantly overwhelming, which is not a good thing. The quality of the treble, however, is vastly superior to that of the X100. It is crisper, with sharper attack, and better decay and extension. I simply love the quality of the treble. The X100 is not a grainy headphone, but sometimes it can sound this way in comparison to the 900 simply because of how clean its treble response is. I'm simply impressed by it, and I'm not saying I'm impressed by it for a semi-closed headphone. I think it even stacks up against good open headphones. The treble is that clean. It's just a shame that it's tuned poorly in terms of tonality. In terms of air, where the TH-X00 had a little bit less air than I would want, the TH-900 has way too much air. This again makes things sound overly artificial. the response can sometimes be echoey or tinny. For example, at the start of Bodhisattva by Steely Dan, the echo from cymbals is the loudest I've heard out of any headphone, and it just sounds unnatural. That's a much more noticeable flaw than the slight lack of air in the X100, in my opinion. In terms of sparkle, the TH-900 has a very realistic sparkle and shimmer. It has phenomenal upper treble extension, but again, it's really excessive in terms of SPL, and it's just too loud. In terms of detail retrieval and poor recordings, partly because of its more prominent and clean treble, the 900 is a more detailed headphone than the X100, and it can pick up small details. It can make them stand out even more. However, unlike on the HD800, that resolve feels forced because of all the treble energy pushed towards your ears. In terms of bad recordings, especially with those that have lots of treble, just stay away. The TH-900 is incredibly unforgiving with poorly mastered music. For example, while listening to Draw a Crowd by Ben Folds 5, the final chorus had these cymbal crashes, right? And the mastering is not the best. And honestly, the crashes made my ears physically uncomfortable. It's something that didn't happen on the X100, despite my volume matching both headphones. It was a bad experience, honestly. Now, in terms of soundstage and imaging, the X100 is a relatively narrow headphone. The soundstage is pretty small, but it has decent imaging. The center image can sometimes be a little confused, and its image seems mostly lateral, but I wouldn't go as far as calling it hazy. The TH-900, in comparison, is a noticeably wider sounding headphone than the X100, with more precise imaging. Its center is slightly more well defined, and the image is a bit more circular when compared to the X100. Even though it's wider though, I wouldn't say its soundstage is particularly big, especially when stacked up against some open cans like the AKG K-Series and the Sennheiser HD800. Even the cheaper Superlux HD681 and 668B have much bigger soundstage than the TH-900. So, in conclusion, sonically I believe that when stock, the Fostex TH-X00 is a better headphone than the TH-900. The 900 has a ton of potential and sounds noticeably cleaner, but despite that, I believe that the X100's more inviting and warm, slightly V-shaped sound signature is a more enjoyable listen than the 900's more extreme V-shape, where the mid-range is very flawed and the treble is extremely hot. This opinion does not take price into account, but when including this factor, my personal choice becomes much more obvious. The 900 is multiple times the price of the X100. So, overall, with the TH-900, Fostex has a superb dynamic driver within their hands, but they exploit it poorly. That is especially disappointing since it is their top-of-the-line proposition, and that even for a colored flavor headphone, it's colored both physically and in terms of sound, the tuning has severe flaws. One reason, according to many, is because the ear pad choice. It is said that pad swapping pads for the TH610 or the X100 pads brings the tonality closer in line to that of these headphones, while retaining the superior technicalities of the TH-900. I will be trying this out, and I will give an update about the results. But until then, the X100 is the better sounding headphone in my book. So, that has been it for this lengthy review. That is my first ever video review, so I would like your comments on my method. Otherwise, please let me know what you think about the TH-X100 and the TH-900, maybe even other headphones of the same family. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, for watching this video, and happy listening.